Welcome to tonight's tutorial, and thank you for joining us for this Q&A session. My name is Margaret Merkley, and I'll be one of your moderators tonight. I chair the OGEHR's Program Committee, and I'm also president of the Ontario Guild of English Handbell Ringers.
Hello, my name's Rob Cairns, and I'm the Vice President of OGEHR. I chair the Education Committee, and I will be co-moderator for this evening's discussion.
Tonight's tutorial is on how to use a metronome, and it's being produced by Dominique Moreau. In addition to this tutorial, Dom produced a tutorial on playing with heavy bells and active listening, both of which now are on the event page of the OGEHR website, if you missed them or if you want to watch them again. Look out for his future tutorials. One is on meters on February the 6th, and malleting bells, which is on March the 6th. We're very appreciative, Dom, of the amount of time that you put into creating these videos and the Q&A sessions as well.
So Dom is a percussionist and a music teacher in Ottawa. He plays with the Ottawa Symphony Orchestra and teaches at Gisèle-Lalonde High School and the Ottawa Youth Orchestra. And as well, he also plays with the St. Andrew's Ringers. So at this point, we'll take any questions that are submitted via our Zoom chat.
And I'll start off though, Dom, and I'm just wondering how I should select a tempo to practice at. How do I go about doing that?
Depends on the piece you're playing for sure. The main goal with the metronome is that you know what the end tempo is supposed to be. So if you're playing a piece with an ensemble and there's a director, it might be good to ask the director, what is your goal speed for this? So I know what to practice, what speed to practice this at. But you should never only practice at the end speed. I like to say that half speed, practicing is very useful. And then you can slowly increase it. First of all, if you need to learn it, you can slowly increase the tempo. So let's say your end goal is 120 beats per minute. Then you can start practicing at 60 if it's possible. Sometimes you need to go even slower, but start at 60 and increase the tempo until you can do it without making mistakes. And every time you're able to play without mistakes, increase the tempo little by little. It can be 2 clicks, 4 clicks, 6 clicks, 10 clicks, whatever it is, until you reach that end tempo. But you don't want to just practice at a tempo all the time. Slower practice is best because you have more time to think about everything you're doing, whether it's the actual motions, your technique, or the music you want to play. It's good to practice at slower speeds. It's also good to bring it up to speed, obviously, to be able to play with the ensemble, and because that's how you're going to perform. But you want to do an increase in speed as you practice towards that goal tempo.
That seems like good advice, Dom. Thank you.
For your counting method, you said 1 and 2 and when you were talking about subdividing, and then 1 e and when you're talking about dividing even further. And of course, we're doing all of this in English right now, but you teach at a French high school, and some of our viewers might in fact also teach at a French immersion or a French first language school. What about counting in French? What is the divisions that you use when you are speaking French?
There's 2 that I use. The one I usually use with my students is basically the name of the notes. We've got a system in French, so for a whole note we say ronde, longue, and for a half note for blanche, 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 so it takes 2 beats to say it. Noir, 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 noir for the chord notes. And then deux croches, quatre double, quatre double, quatre double. There's all these, it's basically based on the names and the number of notes in a beat, and we combine them accordingly. That's one thing I use with my students. The other is just go take, tika, take, tika, take, tika, take, tika. That's your 16th notes. Some people use a similar system in English. I still haven't found a great system to go with the numbers, sadly, if I'm trying to subdivide, that is, in French. Often I'll just either stop at the 8 notes, so un, et, deux, et, trois, et, quatre, et. But I haven't really found syllables that work well between the numbers and the ands in French. But those 3 systems can be used, and they work. I've seen people use similar things in English. Yes, similar syllable systems that work as well. And you don't have the beat number in them. I prefer the beat number, but I haven't found a system that's perfect yet in French.
So it is similar to some of the things that we do in English, because we do use the taka taka, but also tiri, ti, tiri, or tiri, tiri, ti, ti.
Yes.
That's a more common English one when we get away from the actual numbers. But that was a great elaboration for the French language. Thank you.
No problem.
Don, we have a good question here that I think several people might have. Do you ever find that students or just ringers or anybody becomes over-reliant on the metronome?
I mean, I've seen professionals being over-reliant on the metronome, so it's definitely possible that students will be. I actually have a metronome here. Let me just set it up right now. It's clicking 80 beats, and it's just clicking the the beat. But if I put all the 16s, it's basically counting everything for me. If I'm just playing chord notes and 8 notes, the metronome's playing more than I am. And in that case, your internal counting doesn't do much because the metronome's doing all the work for you. And while this can be useful sometimes you want to make sure that every 16th note you're playing is perfectly in time. And I do use that function on the metronome. Most of your metronome practice should not be used with subdivisions all the time. And this is why in the workshops I suggest to slow down the metronome actually, to bring it to half notes or whole notes, so that all the metronome's doing is it's telling you something that you can't rely on because it's too slow. It just acts as a check for you to make sure that your internal timing matches the metronome when you get there. So ideally, you use the beat on the metronome and you get really good at being with the metronome with that. And then once that's achieved, put the metronome at half speed and see if you can still do it.
So really proactive about not overusing it so you don't have to wean yourself off of it.
Can you repeat, please?
So you're being proactive about not overusing it so you don't have to get in a position of weaning yourself off of it.
Yes, yes. You don't want to rely on it. You want to use it basically as the tool it's supposed to be, telling you where the beat is, and that's it. But eventually you get good enough at counting, you don't need the metronome on every beat. Your internal counting gets good enough that you can have the metronome clicking 1 every 2 beats or 1 every 4 beats. One thing I used to do a lot back when I was doing a lot more professional auditions for symphony orchestras, I would practice some of my excerpts with the metronome clicking once every 4 bars. So it's really tough because you can end up after 4 bars and you're just like a 30-second note away from the click, but you're not perfect. And when you're playing actual auditions, sometimes you've got 4, 5, 6 bars of silence in the middle that you actually have to count, and the panel is counting them and they want you to be perfect. And professional musicians tend to be pretty good, especially in orchestras where timing is very important when you're playing with 100 people. So you have to be perfect for the audition. So I would do something like that where the metronome would click every 4 bars, sorry. It's quite difficult at first, but you go through all the steps, 2 beats, then 4 beats, then 2 bars, then you do the 4 bars, obviously. You got to improve your internal counting before you get to that point.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat, and it seems like you've kind of covered part of this already, but the question is, what if a whole note is only worth 2 beats? So you talked a lot about quarter notes, but in this case, it looks like we're looking at maybe even a different time signature.
Okay, if the time signature is different, sorry, this is when talk about pulse and subdivision gets more useful than talking about actual note values. Think about whatever your time signature, whatever your unit of a beat is, this should be equivalent to a chord note. So if you're playing music that's in 2-2, think it's similar to 2-4, except you're beat unit is a half note instead of a quarter note. So your metronome should only be looking the beat unless you're trying to really work on those subdivisions to make sure they're perfect. So your metronome would be clicking the half note, and then when you want to do 2 beats, well, it would become a whole note. They're all relative to each other. So whatever your beat is, the note value that is the beat is the one that you should think as your pulse, and then your subdivision is whatever is underneath that. So if you're playing in 4/2, maybe you've got 4 half notes. Well, then your quarter notes become the first subdivision. So they're the and. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And those are all quarter notes now because we're in 4/2. It's a bit of a... We teach music so much through a quarter note equals 1 beat sometimes that whenever we get out of that, it can be a little daunting at first. But once you wrap your brain around, okay, this is the beat now, then it becomes a lot easier. But sometimes, though, composers really try to mess with your brains. And like Stravinsky in the opening of Firebird, which is in 12 beats per bar because you've got 12 8 notes and each of them is a beat. Sometimes composers just don't help. But ideally, you just adjust to whatever the beat is based on the metric of the piece.
Good, thank you. When you're introducing the metronome to young players, is there certain strategies that you use?
Well, one of them is the game I put in the workshop of clapping only on beat 1 and having the metronome go in and out. So the teacher can easily just mute the metronome. So the one thing I don't like about this new chord metronome, it doesn't have a mute button. But the older version had a mute button. I love that little function. The metronome keeps counting. It doesn't do any sound. So that game is fun because then the metronome, they see it as a tool, not as a tool, sorry, as a toy. Because it's fun. You just, if you have a whole class trying to clap on the beat 1, they'll have a lot of fun. Don't do that for a whole hour, you'll lose them. But basically make games out of it and make games out of counting. I make students count quite a lot, and sometimes I do half the class counting or clapping while the other half is playing their instruments because I teach a band program. Or for handbells, it's even better. You can count out loud everyone while you're playing. So if the counting is good, using a metronome should be good. And it's about listening to it while you're playing, which at first can be a little hard, but practicing under tempo, playing under tempo will help people with that. That's like counting out loud. If you're getting confused with it or something, slow you're practicing down, so you're able to think of all of those things at once. And that really goes back to the first question. Slow down for practice and then speed it up until you're able to play at speed.
Sounds like good strategies, John. Thank you.
You talked about counting out loud when you're practicing. What about for the person that gets confused while they're trying to both count and practice at the same time?
Answer is very similar to the last one. Slow it down until you're able to do it. That is, slow practice is the best practice you can do. If you can play everything slow, and if I can amend my statement, if you can practice slow but the same way you're playing fast. If you're playing handbells and you're playing really fast, you can't do big motions. So when you're practicing slow, something that you will play fast eventually, it's good to practice with the same small motions you would use when you're playing slow. And same thing goes for counting. And try to count less at first. Just count the beats with the metronome. And maybe put the metronome, maybe that's a good time to have the metronome play 8 notes while you're just counting quarter notes, while you get used to that. And then eventually you try to add the next step, counting the 8 notes or the ands, and then counting the 16th notes, the e's and the uhs. Put them one after the other, one at a time, sorry, into your counting. But slow, practice in small sections too. Don't try to start the top of a piece, try to go to the end, counting out loud the whole thing. if you have trouble counting out loud, you won't be able to do the whole thing. So break your practice in small sections. So it's good to practice 4 bars at once, 2 bars at once. Sometimes I practice 2 notes at once, and that's all I do. And then I expand on that to make sure I can do it correctly. And the same goes for counting out loud. But yes, it does get confusing because you're adding an extra layer of things you're trying to think about while you're practicing. But that is the whole point. If you can count out loud, that means you can count internally, no problem.
Thanks, Dom. I think that sort of brings us it's a good time perhaps to bring this portion of our Q&A session to a close, and the formal portion of it. As a great follow-up, and thank you for all the questions that have come through on the chat line as well. You are reminded to please look for Dom's handout that is also going to be on the website.
Please also mark next Sunday, January 17th on your calendars and plan on being a part of OGEHR's next handbell tutorial session. Our guest clinician, Lisa Kyriakides, will be presenting a tutorial on rehearsal techniques for conductors. Please encourage all of your friends, not just conductors, to join us both for the video and on the subsequent Q&A session.
On behalf of the Ontario Guild of English Handbell Ringers, I'd like to thank you all for joining us, both for Dom's premiere showing of his video and also for the live Q&A session. Thank you.